never thought money could be so dangerous. Until the day my mother-in-law slid an envelope across the table, her smile cold, her eyes hiding secrets. "Take this," she said, and walk away from him. My heart raced, my hands trembled, and for a moment, I wondered if I should obey. But there was something in her tone, a warning, a threat, a promise, that made me pause. I didn't realize that one decision could unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and even myself. What happens next changed my life forever. Could I escape her plan, or was I already trapped? The story begins not with fire and betrayal, but with the illusion of peace. I was raised in a modest home where love was the currency, not wealth. My husband's world, on the other hand, was built on old money, power, and the kind of polished perfection that makes outsiders feel like intruders. When I married him, I knew I was stepping into a family that looked at me like a guest who overstayed her welcome. His mother, especially, never hid her disdain. At first, I thought it was the typical mother-in-law tension, clashing personalities, protective instincts, the silent judgment of whether I was good enough. But over time, the undercurrent grew darker. Every smile she gave me carried an edge. Every polite word dripped with poison. She would tilt her head, compliment my dress, then remind me how lucky I was that her son had chosen me, as though I was some charity case. My husband, blinded by loyalty, brushed it off. "She's just strong-willed," he'd say, placing a hand on mine at dinner parties while his mother watched like a hawk. He didn't see the way she studied me, as though calculating how quickly she could make me disappear without disturbing the polished image of their family dynasty. For a while, I tried to win her over. I hosted dinners. I dressed in the elegant, muted tones she adored. I learned which forks to use at her elaborate luncheons, but nothing softened her eyes. In fact, the more effort I made, the colder she became. It wasn't until the family business, an empire of real estate, luxury hotels, and international investments, faced its first true crack in decades that her disdain turned into something more sinister. The press didn't know it, but behind the closed doors of their glass and marble mansion, panic rippled through their perfectly curated life. A risky investment had collapsed. Shareholders whispered. A lawsuit loomed. That was when I began to notice her watching me more closely. At first, I thought she saw me as weak, a distraction to her son while the empire teetered. But one evening, while the family gathered around the grand dining table, she leaned in just enough for me to hear her whisper over the clinking of crystal glasses. "Some women aren't cut out for this life. Some women only drag men down." I froze, staring at her perfectly manicured nails tapping the rim of her wine glass. She smiled sweetly when others looked her way, but her words sliced me in half. And then, it happened. A week later, she called me to meet her alone at a cafe, far from the marble halls of the estate. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting with her posture regal, an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid an envelope across the table. Thick, heavy, full. "This," she said calmly, "is enough to start a new life. Take it. Leave my son and never come back." I blinked, my hands refusing to move toward the envelope. My chest tightened as the cafe sounds around us, muffled conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, faded into silence. Her eyes didn't waver. They weren't asking. They were commanding. She leaned closer, her voice low but sharp. "You've played your part long enough, but you don't belong in this family. You never did. Take the money, disappear, and save yourself the humiliation of what's coming." What's coming? The words wrapped around me like a vice. Did she know something I didn't? Or was this another manipulation? Another way to remind me that in her world I was disposable? I glanced at the envelope again. For a flicker of a second, I imagined taking it, walking away, freeing myself from the weight of her scrutiny, the constant feeling of being out of place. But then I thought of my husband, his laugh, his trust, the way he once looked at me as though I was his anchor in the storm. Walking away wasn't just abandoning him. It was letting her win. Still, I didn't touch the envelope. I simply whispered, "No." Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was victory disguised as patience. "Think carefully," she said. "This isn't an offer that will last forever." She stood, placed her gloves back on with elegance, and walked out, leaving the envelope sitting like a loaded weapon between us. From that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my place in a world that wanted me erased. But I had no idea then that her plan was far bigger than I imagined. And as I watched her retreating figure vanish into the crowd, a chill ran through me. The cracks in the family were widening, and soon the entire empire would shake. And, when it did, she wanted me gone before the dust settled. The envelope should have been easy to ignore. I had left it on the cafe table, untouched, certain I'd walk away without ever thinking of it again. But the truth was, it haunted me. Every night when I tried to sleep, I saw it there, thick, heavy, and full of all the contempt she had for me wrapped in cash. It wasn't just money. It was a message. "You don't belong here." At first, I kept it from my husband. He was already buried in the chaos of his family's business troubles, and I didn't want to add another burden to his shoulders. He spent long nights at the office, reviewing contracts, talking in hushed tones on the phone about falling shares and nervous investors. Whenever I brought up his mother, he brushed it off. "She's just under pressure," he'd say. "She'll come around." But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. She wasn't the type to come around. She was the type to wait, to plan, and to strike. And soon, her strikes became sharper. It started small. Invitations to important family dinners suddenly stopped arriving. I'd hear about them afterward, watching photos of smiling faces surface online. My husband always seated at his mother's right hand, his place as the heir unquestioned. At charity events, whispers followed me. Women leaned into each other, covering their smiles behind jeweled fingers. I didn't need to hear the words. Their glances told me enough. Something was being said about me, and it wasn't kind. Then came the more open attacks. She began planting seeds of doubt directly into my husband's ear. "She doesn't understand this world," she'd murmur within my hearing, pretending to pour more wine at the dinner table. "She's not strong enough for what's coming. She'll leave you when things get difficult. Mark my words." Each sentence was a knife wrapped in silk, and my husband, though he defended me, began to waver under the weight of her poison. The family planet wasn't long before I learned what was coming. The family had a plan, one that had been in motion long before I entered their lives. They intended to restructure the business, merge with another powerful dynasty, and cement their influence for generations. The catch? That merger wasn't just about contracts and shares. It was about marriage. My husband's mother had already set her sights on another woman, the daughter of their soon-to-be partners. Elegant, poised, groomed since birth to play the part of a society wife. She wasn't just a person. She was a piece on their chessboard. And I was in the way. Suddenly her bribe made sense. She hadn't simply wanted me gone because I wasn't good enough. She wanted me gone because I threatened the family's carefully laid empire. If my husband stayed with me, the alliance would crumble, the deal would fail, their empire would weaken. I wasn't just an inconvenience. I was an obstacle. The pressure built with suffocating force. My husband grew distant. Nights at the office turned into entire weekends. He came home smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his. He avoided my eyes when I asked questions. And then, the accusations began. His mother whispered to him about my supposed ambition, that I had married him for money, that I was secretly meeting with lawyers to carve out a share of the estate, that I was plotting to walk away with everything once the business collapsed. None of it was true. But the more he listened, the more his trust eroded. One evening, I found him sitting in the study, the envelope of cash from that cafe spread open on the desk. My heart dropped. "You kept it?" I whispered. He looked up, his face twisted in something between anger and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me she gave you this?" "I didn't take it," I said quickly. "I left it there. She must have..." But the damage was done. The doubt was there, planted like a weed in his mind. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He simply closed the envelope and pushed it aside. But the silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Over the next weeks, the walls closed in. His mother orchestrated every move, isolating me piece by piece. Friends who, once visited, stopped calling. Invitations vanished. Even my husband's affection became rationed, as though loving me had turned into a liability. I realized then that her plan wasn't just to pay me off. It was to break me down, to make me so unwelcome, so unwanted that I'd leave on my own. But I didn't leave. I endured the cold shoulders, the whispers, the endless humiliation of being treated like an intruder in my own marriage. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't. When you've already been underestimated your entire life, survival becomes second nature. And survival was exactly what I intended to do. The final crack came during a gala. It was the family's most important event of the year, a dazzling night of champagne, diamonds, and cameras. My husband stood beside his mother, smiling for photographs while I lingered at the edge like a forgotten accessory. Then, in the middle of the speeches, she struck. She took the microphone, her smile dazzling under the chandelier lights. She praised her son, praised the family, praised the future that awaited them with their new partners. And then she looked directly at me as she said, "Sometimes, sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Not everyone is meant to walk this path with us. But those who are will carry our name into the future." The crowd applauded, oblivious to the dagger hidden in her words. But I felt it pierce straight through me. She wasn't just hinting anymore. She was declaring it, publicly. I wasn't part of their future. And in that moment, standing under the blinding lights, I realized the truth. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was willing to destroy me to protect her empire. But what she didn't know was that I had my own strength, my own secrets, my own power. And when her carefully crafted plan began to fall apart, as all ruthless plans eventually do, she would learn that I wasn't the one who needed to be afraid. She was. The night of the gala should have ended with applause, handshakes, and a deal sealed in glittering perfection. That was the future the mother-in-law had envisioned, the one she had spent years plotting. But beneath the polished surface, cracks had already begun to form. And by the end of that night, those cracks would split wide open for everyone to see. After her cutting speech, the room buzzed with excitement, entirely oblivious to the venom hidden beneath her words. The prospective partners beamed from their seats, clearly impressed by her confidence. The cameras clicked, recording every smile, every sparkling toast. But what she hadn't counted on was how fragile her empire had become. For months, rumors had been swirling. Whispers of financial instability, of rushed decisions, of desperate attempts to hold everything together. Investors had grown nervous. Journalists were circling. And in her arrogance, she had assumed her control over appearances would be enough to keep the truth buried. What she didn't realize was that the truth was about to explode, and it would happen in front of every person who mattered. It started small. A reporter, bold enough to speak above the din of clinking glasses, asked a question that sliced through the scripted perfection. "Mrs. Is it true your family's shares have been pledged to secure private debts?" The room hushed. My mother-in-law's smile faltered. Only for a second, but it was enough. "Rumors," she replied, her tone sharp, completely unfounded. But the damage was done. Eyes shifted. Doubts stirred. The prospective partners whispered among themselves, their smiles stiffening. I watched it all from the sidelines, my heart pounding. She had spent months trying to convince everyone that I was the liability, that I was the crack in the family's foundation. But now, with one simple question, the cracks in her foundation had begun to show. My husband, standing at her side, looked shaken. For months he had been her loyal soldier, absorbing her poison and defending her schemes. But now, as he watched the crowd murmur and his mother scramble to regain control, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt. He glanced at me, and for the first time in weeks, our eyes locked. There was a question there, unspoken but undeniable. What if she's been wrong all along? And that was when the final blow landed. From the back of the room, a man in a tailored suit rose to speak. He wasn't part of the family, nor the partners. He was an auditor, one whose reports had been conveniently buried, silenced by my mother-in-law's influence. But tonight, he had come prepared. "In the interest of transparency," he began, his voice carrying across the stunned ballroom, "I think it's only fair the public knows the full state of affairs before any agreements are signed." He pulled out a stack of documents, each one stamped, official, and damning. And as he read them aloud, the facade shattered. The debts were real, the assets overstated. The empire wasn't thriving, it was teetering on collapse. The very merger she had promised as salvation was nothing more than a lifeline to cover years of reckless decisions. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The partners, red-faced with fury, rose from their seats. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every second of her humiliation. And in the center of it all, my mother-in-law stood frozen, her carefully constructed mask crumbling under the weight of truth. My husband turned to her, his face pale. "You lied," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but caught by the microphones nearby. "You've been lying to all of us." The words hit harder than any accusation I could have made, because in that moment, he wasn't her loyal soldier anymore. He was her accuser. She reached for him, desperate. "I did this for you, for the family, for our future." But it was too late. The world had seen the truth. Her empire, her reputation, her plan, all of it lay in ruins at her feet. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk or revel in her downfall. I didn't need to. The truth itself was louder than any revenge I could have plotted. For months, she had painted me as the weakness, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. But as the cameras turned to capture the chaos, one thing became painfully clear. I had never been the threat to her empire. She was. I stood quietly at the edge of the ballroom, untouched by the storm, while she became the spectacle. As the night descended into scandal, the partners withdrew, their alliance shattered. Reporters swarmed, demanding answers. Security ushered guests out as whispers of lawsuits and investigations filled the air. And my mother-in-law? She stood in the wreckage of her own making, stripped of her power, her influence, and the respect she had guarded like a crown. Her plan had been flawless, except for one thing. She had underestimated me. She had assumed I would break, bend, or disappear. She had never imagined that I would survive long enough to watch her empire collapse from within. And as she was escorted out of the ballroom, her shoulders hunched. In defeat, I knew the war was over, not because I had fought her, but because she had destroyed herself. The night of the gala became a story whispered across the city, a cautionary tale about arrogance, greed, and the fragile nature of reputation. By the time dawn broke, my mother-in-law's empire was no longer untouchable. It was fractured, bleeding, and on the verge of collapse. But while she stumbled into disgrace, something unexpected began to grow from the ashes: dignity, healing, and justice. By sunrise, newspapers and blogs were ablaze with headlines: empire exposed, hidden debts, and broken promises. Matriarchs fall from grace at gala event. Family dynasty in peril. Her name, once synonymous with power, was now tied to scandal. The photographs showed her mid-step, face pale, mouth open, as if still scrambling for words that never came. The documents read aloud at the gala spread like wildfire online, dissected by analysts and critics alike. The world no longer saw her as a queenpin of industry. They saw her as a fraud. My husband sat across from me at the breakfast table the next morning, silent, shaken. The man who had once echoed his mother's every word now sat in disbelief at how blind he had been. "I thought she was protecting us," he admitted finally, his voice low. "I thought she was holding everything together, but she was tearing it apart." For months, he had been my harshest critic, parroting her venom and doubting my worth. But now, with the truth laid bare, he looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with suspicion, but with something I hadn't seen in a long time: respect. He reached for my hand. "You never fought her. You just stood tall. And now I see why. You were stronger than both of us." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the beginning of something better: understanding. The principal players fall in the days that followed. The fallout only deepened. The partners withdrew completely, releasing statements that distanced themselves from the family. Lawsuits emerged, investigations launched, and for the first time, the woman who had believed herself untouchable found herself cornered. Her board members demanded answers. Some resigned outright, unwilling to go down with her ship. Her phone, once ringing with invitations and praise, now went silent. Doors she had walked through effortlessly for years slammed shut in her face, and with every headline, every whispered rumor, her power dwindled further. My quiet strength through it all. I didn't gloat. I didn't spread stories or feed the flames of her downfall. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. Not just my marriage, but my own peace. For months, I had been her target, painted as the outsider, the intruder, the weak link. But as the empire crumbled, people began to see me differently. Not as the cause of the family's collapse, but as the one who had endured it with dignity. Friends and acquaintances who had once kept their distance now spoke to me with warmth. Strangers who had read about the scandal admired how quietly I had weathered the storm. Without lifting a finger, I had become the opposite of what she had claimed I was: respected. The mother-in-law's isolation. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law retreated into silence. The woman who had once commanded rooms with a single glance now found herself ignored, her voice irrelevant. Invitations to social events vanished. Her so-called friends drifted away, unwilling to be associated with disgrace. Even her most loyal allies began to waver, whispering behind her back, blaming her for the empire's collapse. And in her isolation, she finally faced the truth she had spent years denying. Her hunger for control had cost her everything. A daughter-in-law's victory. But my victory wasn't in her downfall. It was in the restoration of balance. in the way my husband began to stand beside me instead of behind her, in the way my dignity, once threatened, now stood unshaken. She had tried to erase me, to buy me out, silence me, and paint me as unworthy. But in the end, I remained, stronger, more visible, and more respected than before. Her attempt to remove me had only removed herself. A powerful lesson weeks later, at a quiet family gathering, my husband spoke words that silenced the room. My mother always believed power came from control, he said, his eyes moving between us. But tonight, I know better. Real strength isn't in controlling others. It's in standing firm when others try to break you. He turned to me then, his voice steady. She showed me fear, but you showed me courage. And that's the legacy I want for our family. It was a statement not just to me, but to the entire family, and to her. In that moment, she looked away, unable to meet my eyes. For once, she had no words. The long-term consequences, her empire never fully recovered. Though pieces of it were salvaged, by others her name was permanently tainted. Investors refused to trust her. Journalists followed her every move, reminding the world of her disgrace. She lived on, but her power was gone. And as for me, my life didn't suddenly become a fairy tale. There were still scars, still memories of the months I had spent under her shadow. But those scars became reminders of resilience, of patience, of the strength it takes to outlast cruelty. Because in the end, I hadn't needed to fight her. I had only needed to survive her, and survival, as it turned out, was the sharpest revenge of all. Closing takeaway for Viewer's Life will always bring people who try to break you, with words, with power, with cruelty, disguised as control. Sometimes, fighting back isn't about raising your voice. Sometimes the most powerful statement is in refusing to break, because eventually, the truth reveals itself. And those who build empires on fear and lies will always, in the end, destroy themselves.